Hi, Easily students. It's Miss Hartley here. I miss you guys. I wish I was doing this in person, but we'll just have to settle for video. We got some new books over the summer, and normally, they would just be on display when you walk into the library. But since you're not walking into the library, you can just be searching the catalog. I wanted you to see all these new books, so you could put in hold requests so that you can pick up these books through the drive-through. So I'm gonna start with graphic novels because that's what everybody wants anyway. We did get a kind of a decent amount. I think I've got about 15 here. So I'm gonna start off with the ones that you guys kind of know already, either continuations of series or updates, and then I'll go into some new ones you might not have heard of. All right, so got the new Babysitters Club. This one's Boy Crazy Stacy. I believe we also have an ebook version of this as well. I think we have 3 or 4 of these that you guys really like. Bird and Squirrel. This one's called All or Nothing, but we have Bird and Squirrel on Ice and Bird and Squirrel on Fire, so this will be a fun one that you're familiar with. This one we have, I think, 2 or 3 of. It's called Catstronauts, so this is just the latest update about these cats that live in space. The new Dogman, which we have in ebook form, but this is the print one. I'm sure there's probably a new Dogman that's going to come out pretty soon as well. And again, another one that I think we have an ebook of, but now we have in print too. The latest one in Hazardous Tales. This is called Major Impossible, and it takes place in the Grand Canyon. So those are all the ones that you would kind of know already. Here's some ones that you might not, and I'm going to go ahead and say these would be good 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. I've got a few others that were like really more like 5th grade, middle school stories, so we'll start with these. I flipped through this one. It's called Clyde, and it's by Jim Benton. Jim Benton's done a couple other things. I think he did one called Franny McBrain or something like that, but he's pretty funny. So this book is about a cranky bear, and he's cranky all the time, and all the other animals try and make him feel better, but it's just a funny, silly story. I think 2nd graders and 3rd graders would really like this one. This is a new one called Baloney and Friends. Again, it's just like a silly story about a pig and a bunny and a horse, and it's just got a lot of funny jokes in it. So if you want to laugh, try Baloney and Friends. So this is kind of cool. They're starting to take the I Survived books and put them in graphic novel format. So this is the first I Survived that ever came out, which is about the sinking of the Titanic. So it's the same story that if you are familiar with that book, if you've read that before, it's just told in graphic novel format. All right, so those are good for all grade levels. So I kind of want to show that would be, these are really better for some older kids, definitely kind of later 4th graders or 5th graders. This, we have an ebook format. Actually, this is probably good for everybody. This is a book about having anxiety. And so she kind of feels sick and nauseous all the time, but then thinking about being sick and nauseous makes her really anxious. So I actually really liked it. I don't always read all of her books, but I decided to read this one, and I was a big fan. So check out the new one by Rachel Telgemeier. I believe we also have it in ebook. So this, as you can see, has won some awards. It won the Newbery Award this year, which is a pretty big deal because the Newbery Award is given to the best book of the year written for children. So it's a pretty big deal that it's a graphic novel that won that this year. It also won the Coretta Scott King Award, which is for books that feature characters that are Black and African American. I liked this a lot. So it's about a kid who lives in kind of like a poorer neighborhood in New York City, and he ends up getting into like a fancy school that you would have to apply and get into that's more in like the rich part of town. So it's a lot about how he has to act like when he's at home in his own neighborhood and around his friends, and when he goes to this new school where he's like maybe maybe there might be 3 other Black kids in this whole school, and how he has to adapt and deal with that. So it's about making friendship, but I really like the art in it a lot. He is an artist himself, so like sometimes he'll draw like what he's feeling, like almost like you can see into his notebooks, like this is like what he's feeling. So I highly recommend checking this one out. It's called The New Kid, and the author is Jerry Craft. So I've got another one that's kind of about growing up and like how your friends and you know, as you get older, things start to change, and some kids are ready for some things and some kids are not. So these are two best friends, and they're working on a movie together. They want to make a movie to win a contest about the Jersey Devil, which is sort of like Bigfoot. But one of the boys kind of makes friends with a girl, and you know, and it starts getting into, the other friend gets jealous that that this guy is trying to spend so much time with a girl, and he doesn't really understand because he's not in a place for that. So it's pretty good. I enjoyed it okay. There is a librarian in it that has purple hair. Here she is. So, I mean, there's that. Okay, this one's called The OK Witch. I like this one. It's about a girl who doesn't realize that she's part of a long family line of witches, but they didn't tell her. And so one day she just kind of starts having powers and being able to do spells. And then it kind of goes back into her family's history and why they didn't tell her. There was a famous thing in American history called the Salem witch trials, in which a bunch of women were accused of being witches and were killed for it. So it kind of ties into that story. But it's, I like this one actually a lot. It's a good story about a mother and her daughter, and it's the grandmother gets involved too. So it's a good story about family, but it's also kind of like, she gets bullied a lot, like, you know, a lot of kids in her school aren't very nice to her, so it's a good story for bullying and those kind of feelings too. This is by Kwame Alexander, and he wrote a few books that we have in the library that are not graphic novels. One's called Booked, and I think the other one's called Rebound. So if you like this story, you might want to check out his other stories that are not graphic novels. I loved the art style of this book a lot. One funny part, let's see if I can find it, is that it's about these twin brothers. And they're both basketball players and both really good. Like they're playing for a middle school team, and like they're going to the middle school championships and stuff like that. But they have a lot of differences. Oh, here's the part I wanted to find. For example, one is a Carolina fan and one is a Duke fan. That was a funny detail for us here in North Carolina. It's definitely like a, you know, one of the brothers ends up kind of getting a girlfriend and leaving the other brother behind. And there's some stuff going on with their dad. So there's some kind of intense stuff in this book, but I think it's a great, I enjoyed it, but just be prepared for a little bit of sadness. I don't want to spoil anything, but just be ready for that. Speaking of sadness, but also in a good way. I loved this book. So this is by the girl who wrote Roller Girl, and she wrote this story with somebody who was a refugee in Somalia. Well, he was Somalian, and he was in a refugee camp in Kenya. Remember, when you're a refugee, you have to leave your country because of dangerous conditions, and you often end up in just sort of like this middle area called a refugee camp, and that's where the book takes place. So it's just like a wonderful examination of what it would be like to have to live through something like that. It's pretty long. I was kind of surprised how long it is, but it's a really great story about a culture that you may not be familiar with at all, but it really makes you feel and understand what it might be like to be a refugee. There is that book that a lot of you guys like that's called Refugee, so if you enjoyed that, you might want to try this graphic novel. And that was called, When the Stars Are Scattered was the name of that. And then finally, this is our last one. I didn't read this one, but Mrs. Keeler did, and she liked it. She said it was called Stargazing, and it's just a story about fitting in, because they are Asian in the story, and a lot of people in their school aren't, so she really liked it. So try Stargazing. All right, so those are our graphic novels. You can put those on hold to do book requests, and hopefully you guys can start picking them up and reading them.